Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming this evening. My name is Lizzie Bowden and I am the Adult Services Manager here at the Hinsdale Library. So just a few announcements before we introduce our speaker this evening, Liz Heinecke. First of all, most of you have heard me say already, but we do have a raffle for one of 5 copies of the book Radiant by Liz. If you would like to enter, we'll be pulling the winners at the end and they'll have an opportunity to get their book signed. We also have some books for checkout. And if you head upstairs to our quiet room after the event tonight, you will see a small display of Loie Fuller posters from her time in Paris upstairs. I'll be happy to show everybody where that is after the event ends tonight. So you can all see, I think it'll be really exciting to see after the presentation. We do also have survey cards on everybody's chair for our new strategic planning process is taking place now, and we are really looking forward to hearing from Hinsdalians about what they would like to see from the library over the next 3 years. So if you have a chance to please take that survey, it does close on the 30th, so please take it soon if you can. And then last but not least, I'd like to tell you about a few more upcoming events. First, the Hinsdale Historical Society has their good old-fashioned family fun on July 21st, which will be Loie Fuller themed. That'll take place at the Hinsdale History Museum from 12 to 2 on that day. So write it down in your calendars. And of course, we have some exciting upcoming library programs as well. Michelle Zauner will be joining us on June 30th. She is the author of the very famous book, Crying in H Mart. So keep an eye on our website to sign up for those and see what else is coming up. And also keep an eye on Historical Society's website, social media, our social media, because there will be more Loie Fuller themed events coming this fall to celebrate 160 years since her birth. And with no further ado, I will introduce our speaker. Liz Heinecke has an undergraduate degree in art from Luther College, a master's degree in bacteriology from UW-Madison, and worked as an academic molecular biology researcher before starting her wildly successful online educational platform, kitchenpantryscientist.com. And we have a few of her books for checkout just over to the side. She has written 7 books teaching kids and their parents how to perform simple science experiments at home, including 2 which pair science experiments with history lessons about scientists. She is a regular fixture on local TV morning shows, including CBS and ABC, and frequently makes appearances for library programs and at STEM, STEAM, and tech festivals. Between experiments and writing, Liz paints, sings, and plays the banjo, which is awesome. She lives in Minneapolis and has come all this way to us to share her expertise on Marie Curie and, of course, Hinsdale native Loie Fuller. We welcome you and thank you so much for coming.
Okay, can you hear me okay? I will try to speak slowly. I do 3-minute television segments all the time and I'm rushing and rushing. So just yell out to slow down. Also, if you have any questions as I'm talking about these photos I'm going to show you, please feel free to raise your hand. I know when I'm watching a presentation, I always forget the question I wanted to ask by the end. So just yell out or raise your hand and I'll try to keep an eye out. So Loie Fuller and Marie Curie, how many of you knew that they knew each other? How many of you knew who Loie Fuller was? All of you. Okay, good. Some people from Hinsdale haven't heard of her, which is, and I certainly hadn't heard of her when I first decided to write a book about Marie Curie. I was reading her, Marie Curie's daughter, Eve, was the only non-scientist in the family. She was an amazing journalist, a beautiful writer. She wrote a biography of her mother's life. And I was reading that and I stumbled across the name of Loie Fuller, who, as I had said, I'd never heard of. Eve writes that Loie came into their house, this fairy of light. She danced. She established a fond friendship with her parents and wrote that she had written to Marie asking for some radium to light her dances. And I was intrigued. I love Paris. I love art. I love when art and science not clash, when they come together and make more amazing things. So I started at first just on the internet looking up Loie Fuller. And I just got hints and pieces. I ran across a few excerpts from Current and Current wrote a very nice biography of Loie Fuller. And I saw some of those. So I started ordering every book I could find on Loie Fuller and discovered that a lot of her stuff was in the New York City Public Library of Performing Arts. And I happened to be going out there for a STEM festival, actually. So I was able to spend 2 days down in their archives of the Jerome Robbins dance collection, and they have Loie Fuller. There are hundreds and hundreds of letters by Loie Fuller floating around. But her notebooks are there, notebooks about her life experiences, but also notebooks containing some lectures that she gave. She loved giving lectures. She was quite a character. So I'm going to talk about her a lot tonight. But I ran across pages and pages about radium and about Madame Curie. And I thought, how fascinating that this famous French dancer was so interested in radium. And then I read about her experience in Thomas Edison's lab, which I write about in my book. I drew some of it from a newspaper article that I found about her visit to Edison's lab, but a lot of it she wrote about in her journals. She wrote about seeing her hand illuminated by an X-ray bulb on a chemically coated screen. She wrote about asking Thomas Edison, well, will it keep glowing if I take my hand out? And Edison saying, oh, I never thought of that. So I just thought, wow, this woman is amazing. She knew Thomas Edison. Then I found out she was friends with Auguste Rodin, the famous French sculptor. And I thought I need to find out how connected she was to Marie. And I started reading more and more and realized that she was friends with Marie. They met in Paris around 1901, and they were friends until Loie died in 1929, I believe. So that's how I got interested. And I decided to write it as a parallel biography because their lives were paralleled in so many ways. They both came to Paris from places where they couldn't do what they wanted to do, or they were not appreciated. They came to Paris, they were both almost blinded by their work. They both became ill from their work, but they also both became famous from their work. And they were the most driven individuals you can imagine. They did so many incredible things during their life. Both of them, both in France and in the United States. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about their stories today. I'm going to focus more on Loie than on Marie because this is her hometown. Loie Fuller was born here in 1862 in what was called the Old Tavern at the time. And I think later was called the Castle Inn. And I'm planning to drive by the site there tomorrow. I believe there are a couple of gas stations there now. If you want to stay after, I brought along my research folder from Fullersburg. And I also brought some Loie Fuller artifacts. So I'll put them out on this table here if you want to look at them later. But she was born in the inn because it was so cold that they couldn't keep their farmhouse warm enough. They came into town so that she could give birth to Loie safely. Loie was actually born Marie Louise Fuller. She later was called Louie and then changed her moniker to Loie when she was an actor. I think it was a very cool sounding name. Okay, so this is a picture of Loie and Marie when they were very young. Loie came to Paris in 1892, and Marie came a little bit before in 1891. But the two women, Marie was born in 1867, so she was about 5 years younger than Marie. But they were born about 5 years apart. They came to Paris around the same time, and they died about 5 years apart. So that's another interesting parallel. Okay, let's see. I'm clicking on the, okay, let me try something else. Here we go. Okay, here we go. Okay, so when Loie came to Paris, she came thinking she had not found success. She had created this dance called the Serpentine, and I write about in the book how she created it. Loie was a storyteller. She told her stories over and over again. They often changed a little bit, but she was all about stories. She was all about sort of building her own image. She sort of made herself into a celebrity. But she told a story of getting this voluminous skirt that someone gave her, and she wore it in one of the plays she was in. She had grown up on the stage. She was a child actor. She was a temperance lecturer. She writes about in her unpublished parts of her autobiography. She writes about going on her own and renting out a lecture hall and thinking, what am I going to lecture about? And her parents said, "What, you did what?" And she said she had been in a play, an anti-alcohol play. So she said, "I'm going to lecture on temperance," and she did it, and she made a bunch of money, and she was really excited, and she did it again and again. She was an actor. She was in this play called, I think it was called Dr. Quack, MD. She had this huge voluminous skirt. She had to belt it up under her waist into like almost an empire-like dress. She was supposed to be hypnotized. So she was following the doctor around on stage like this and imitating his arm motions. And the skirt was so big, she had to hold it up so she wouldn't trip. And this is Loie's story about what happened. And then supposedly people in the audience started shouting, a butterfly, and they didn't care about the play, but they loved what she was doing. So she went home and did it in front of a mirror and figured out, this is really amazing. I've never seen anything like this. She was an inventor. She'd been in the theater for a long time. Electric lights were new. She was picking up new special effects all the time or creating them. Her brothers called her a faker all the time when she was growing up because she was always inventing things and making special effects and making things look interesting. So this is how she created her dance, which she called the Serpentine. And you can read about in the book about how she had to convince people to watch her do the dance, but then they were interested and then people loved it. And then everyone started copying her. She tried to patent it, but they wouldn't patent dances at that time. In fact, until fairly recently, they haven't patented choreography. So she wanted to patent her costume. But eventually she went to Europe because she had so many imitators in the US, she lost her brief stardom that she had in the US. She went to Germany, which was a huge failure. She traveled with her mother and her manager, her parents. So her grandfather was Benjamin Fuller, who came from the East Coast here and established Fullersburg, right? And her father, Reuben, and her mother, Delilah, lived with her when she lived with them when she was young, but then she started traveling with acting troupes. She traveled with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show for a while. She was in one of those plays until she got smallpox and had to quit. But her parents never divorced, but I don't think they got along that well. And her father was always betting on horses, from what my research said. But he was also a great fiddle player, a great dancer. He was a really fun guy, but not all that dependable. He was, buying property down in Florida. So Loie's mother went with her daughter and traveled to Europe with Loie and her manager. And Loie's mother lived with her from then on until she died. Delilah did. But Germany was a big failure. Loie ended up in a circus. They came to Paris. The manager had thought he could get her a gig at the Paris Opera, which if you've been to the Paris Opera, it's incredible, this huge opulent building, the Palais Garnier. And they got to Paris, checked into the Grand Hotel, which you can actually see through the windows of the opera. I went to Paris to do my research, so I'll show you some pictures. And the opera manager said, no, doesn't seem interesting enough. So they ended up at the Folie Bergère, which was a burlesque club in Paris. This is how it looked around the time Loie and her manager and mother arrived. And you can see all these posters they have all along the street? So they get to the club. Her manager says, this is it. You're going to make it big at the Follies. They walk up to the front door and there's a giant poster that says Serpentine Dancer, the original. And it has a picture of one of Loie's competitors, like her imitators on it. So she's been beat to Paris, but they go into the Folie Bergère to watch the show. And I believe my next slide shows the inside of the Folie Bergère. So this is how it looked around the time Loie danced there. So it was really full of mostly, men and prostitutes, or what they call the demi-monde. So the people who like to have fun, At that time in Paris, women were either wives or prostitutes, pretty much. That's how they were classified. And in the Folie Bergère, they would have acrobats. They would put on plays, the vaudeville plays. And so this is the scene that they arrived to inside the theater. This is how it looked when I visited Paris in 2018. It hasn't changed all that much. The stairways have changed a little. Now there's a single stairway that goes up the middle and branches off, but the theater is almost exactly the same. I think I have a picture of the inside, but you can see how gaudy it is. One thing that was really fun about doing the research for this book, oh, now I lost my page, was finding what people had written at the time about these places. So let me just see if I can find this. There was one author in particular who was there maybe 20 years before Loie, named Huysman. And so he wrote about the Folie Bergère in 1879. What is truly admirable, truly unique is that this theater has a real air of the boulevards about it. It is ugly and superb. It is in both exquisitely good and outrageously bad taste. It's also unfinished, like anything that aims to be truly beautiful. The theater with its auditorium whose faded reds and tarnished golds clash with the brand new luxury of the Faux Jardin is the only place in Paris that stinks so deliciously of the makeup of bought caresses and the desperation of depravities that fail to excite. So he was a realist, you know, a naturalist, but I love it because it's just this over the top gaudy place, but it's really cool at the same time. Okay, so we went to see a show here. We went to see Le Petit Prince. Oh, I guess I don't have a picture of the inside. Shoot. I thought I did. Let me go back one more. Let me see if it's the next one. No. Okay. Anyway, the inside hasn't changed much. I think if you go on my, I have a Radiant website for my book. I think if you go on there, you can see a picture of the inside, but the inside is just red velvet and gold. It really hasn't changed since Loie first danced there in 1900. And we went into the theater and we sat up at in the balcony where Loie sat as she watched her competitor dance horribly on the stage. So right after the show, she went and talked to the manager and she took this woman's job and spent the next few weeks preparing for her dances. And I'll show you a little bit more about her dances and how they evolved. But this is, and I have this postcard with me, I think this is a poster of, and a newspaper article of Loie's Serpentine dance. And this is right around the time she arrived in Paris. She for a while would paint snakes and flowers on her dancing robes that she would manipulate. And then she had electricians in the wings that had spotlight. So electrical light was fairly new in Paris. They had always used gas lights on the stages. And Loie was the first person to really fully incorporate spotlights into her work. She was also the first person to completely darken a theater. Before that, they always had the gas lights up. She tried writing the music on black paper with white ink, but the musicians hated it. So she actually created covers for the musicians' music stands, darkened the theater, and then she had electricians. Her brothers were actually two of her electricians, but she had electricians in the wings that had spotlights with discs in front of them. I have a picture I'll show you later, but these discs rotated and they had all these holes in them, and each hole had glass covered with gelatin in it. And Loie had worked really hard to tint this gelatin to the perfect colors so that when they shone the light through it, it would project colors on her white costumes, and then they could spin it when she signaled them and change the color that was projected on her. So as she's dancing and making these beautiful, you can see geometric shapes with her costume, she's tapping her foot to signal them, and they are changing the color of light that they're splashing on her gown. So she's made herself into a human canvas. And Paris went crazy for this. Paris loves art and Paris loves modernity. It was a very modern city at the time. And she was really the first person that went outside the boundaries of you're either a ballet dancer or you're a can-can dancer. And the symbolist movement was sort of growing in Paris at the time. So people could look at her, and everyone, you know, we all perceive things differently. So everyone would look at her and see something different. You know, some people would see a butterfly, some people would see waves, but all the artists then wanted to paint her. She became famous almost overnight. So it was really, her rise to fame was really fast. And the amazing thing is, although her fame sort of came and went, she remained relevant. Her art remained relevant until her death in 1929. And that's a really long run. Yes.
Do you know what the music was like?
Yes. In fact, if you go to my book website, I have a Loie Fuller playlist. So she loved WC. I mean, I did research. Her first Serpentine dance she did to, I think it's called Bal de Loie. If you hear it, you'll recognize it. There's another very famous French.
Classical or
yes.
Spanish or?
Mostly classical. Mussorgsky. I mean, when she got into her later stuff, Chopin, she loved Chopin. So all classical. And she actually knew some of these composers. But yeah, so yeah, I'll try to write down my book website. I think it's on my publisher website, but if you just go to my publisher website, I have a Loie Fuller playlist that you can listen to. She danced to so many things. And I could find this because all of her old programs, or a lot of them, are in the New York Public Library of Performing Arts. You can see what her dances were called, what music she danced to. So it's just incredible. She never really liked jazz, which I thought was interesting. She always liked classical music the best. Okay, this is a picture of Delilah, Loie Fuller's mother. She has lots of really nice pictures with her mother. She has a picture of her and her, I think her and her mother on a bicycle. I'm trying to remember if her mother was in like something that she was pulling. But her mother was interesting for a number of reasons. Her mother really gave Loie an air of respectability, which was very important to Loie, and which allowed her and her act, because her act didn't show any skin, the Folies Bergère became sort of a family destination for the first time ever. It had always been, you know, like I said, men and prostitutes, but now they were having matinees and people were bringing their children, women were bringing their children to come see Loie dance. And I think part of her reputation, which she cultivated very carefully at first when she was in Paris especially, had something to do with her mother. And lots of the critics would actually make fun of her mother. You know, they'd say, there's always this old woman sitting in the front row. But Loie really loved her mother. And I think it's really special that she had that kind of relationship with her mom. I think they sort of took care of each other. In the other frame is Loie's partner, Gab. The story of Gab is very interesting. Gab saw Loie dance first when she was only 14 and had a family connection. One of Loie's critics, one of the critics who loved Loie was, I believe, Gab's uncle, Max. I'm forgetting his name, but Gab ended up being Loie's assistant for a while. And then Gab's mother died. Gab's mother was married to a banker who wasn't a very nice man, but Gab's mother apparently was one of the most beautiful women in Paris. She traveled to India, wrote a book about it, came back and died young. But they fell out of touch because Loie's work always came first. And, you know, Gab wasn't allowed to be her assistant, and just Loie lost track of her. But later they reconnected when I think Gab was 18 or 19 and became, as far as I know, a romantic couple. And Loie never said that, you know, Loie never said Gab is my lover. But if you read all of their letters to each other, there's clearly affection, romantic love. They talk about wanting to live together, or Gab especially. Loie's always like, yeah. But Gab wanted to live with Loie. But Gab was also Loie's business manager and spent her life until Loie died putting fires out for Gab. And then after Loie died, Gab became a partner with another a French actress. So, and Gab was very well connected with, at the time there were a lot of Americans in particular who were writers and artists who came to Paris for freedom. So there was a large community of lesbians that lived in Paris at that time. And Gab was connected to that circle, but Loie never was. She was always worried about her reputation because she knew her public image was everything. So that's a very interesting aspect of the book. And there'll be, in the next few years, 2 women are making a documentary about Loie Fuller that's going to be very well researched. It'll probably be on PBS or something, or BBC, and they're learning a lot. I know them from my research, and they're learning a lot more about Gab, I think. So I'm really interested to see that. Yes.
Did her performance consist of several dances right in a row, or one long performance?
Several dances. So when she first started, at least, it was several dances right in a row. So she would have the violet dance, and then the yellow dance, or and the white dance, or the mirror dance. So at first, yeah, she would usually change costumes and do several short dances in a row, but it was physically exhausting. So what I didn't say when I was describing these dances is as her dances evolved, she stopped painting things on her gowns. And in the last picture, you can see on the end, she stopped painting things on her gowns. She had started sewing these wands into the ends of her sleeves that she held when she danced that extended her arms so she could throw the fabric and make bigger and bigger shapes. And as she evolved, she started dancing in only white, using only light to paint her costumes, and throwing up bigger and bigger pieces of fabric. And I'll show you some more pictures of her as we go. Okay. Okay, I write about this in the book. This is really neat. I got permission from Scientific American to use this image. This is an article. On the right is a patent application for one of Loie's costumes. On the left is a Scientific American article where they show Loie Fuller's lighting system in great detail. So you can see here she's standing on a piece of glass, right? And there's light projected from underneath. And this was really important for a fire dance she did, where they would project red and yellow and a light from underneath. And she looked like a flame through up huge amounts of fabric. On the left, you can see some of the electricians in the wings, and you can see those spinning discs that they were shining the spotlights through. And then someone just with a regular spotlight in front. But what's so amazing about this article is they don't credit Loie Fuller for all these inventions. At that time, Scientific American was mostly a patent magazine. They had articles too, but it was mostly just patents. And they say Loie Fuller was the originator of the serpentine dance. And then they go on to describe her technology she invented for a full page and never mention her name again. So I can't imagine how frustrating that was.
To me, she looks rather short, so I wondered if she had some mechanical something within her gown and over with.
Yes, she had wooden rods sewn into her gown to help her. Yeah, she was very short. I think she was 5'2". She was not tall. She was not your typical dancer, but she was so famous because she was so creative, and she knew her brain was what set her apart from everyone else, and her creativity. And she, like I said, there were many more beautiful dancers in Paris, but she was the best, most interesting dancer in Paris. She wasn't even that good a dancer, honestly. And lots of people will tell you that. She was okay. She was a good actor. She was a good singer. She could dance, but she wasn't an Isadora Duncan, or she wasn't a great dancer, but she knew what she was doing with her special effects. So that's really what made her. Yeah, so eventually she did get some of her costumes and stage designs patented, but it took a long time. And luckily, by the time she went to Paris and became so famous, she talked to the newspaper all the time. And she often talked to women reporters, which I thought was really neat. But she definitely established herself as the creator of the serpentine dance. So at some point, she didn't have to worry about her imitators so much, but she always was fighting to get credit for her inventions. And we were talking about this before. A lot of things she invented. I think she invented is it called a scrim? In theater, I talk about it in the book. They take a sheer piece of fabric and hang it over the stage, and you can project images on it or behind it. And the description I give in the book of her doing that in a performance is her own description, I believe, from one of her notebooks or from a newspaper article. She actually, I think, designed that technology. So she invented so much stage technology that people have no idea. Okay, what's next? Oh, okay, this is cool. So in 1900, Paris hosted a world exposition. And I could have written 3 chapters just on this because there's so much fascinating stuff online. I would recommend looking it up. It was in Paris. They built world expositions back then. They would have people come from every country and build these temporary buildings representing their country. They built moving sidewalks going all around Paris that people could just step on and ride from place to place because electricity was just becoming available, electrical grids. What else? The Eiffel Tower was there from the previous exposition, and you could ride the elevator up the Eiffel Tower, but Thomas Edison was there, or he had one of his guys there, I think. And you can go on YouTube and watch films of people riding up the elevator on the Eiffel Tower in 1900 at this exposition. But Loie wanted her own theater. So I think I have a copy of this letter here with me. She wrote a letter to everyone she knew in Paris to try to get her own theater on the boulevard where only other French people were there. So she wanted to say like, I am part of French culture. She wanted to establish that. This is the theater that she built. She danced here. several times a day during the exposition. She got it built in 6 weeks. It was supposed to take 6 months. There's a great description of her going to the site and bossing the guys around and running off then, with her hair all messy and she was just a character, but she got things done. I mean, she was driven. They call that I think that article was where someone called her a very driven woman, But in this theater, you can see the architecture reflects the draperies in her dresses, and her face is on, I think, on there somewhere. In this theater, she danced, and she had also hired a Japanese acting troupe, and this woman named Sada Yako, who was an actress, and they were one of the biggest attractions at this exposition. And like, as I say on here, Pablo Picasso came to see her, the actress Sarah Bernhardt, Toulouse-Lautrec, who was on his last legs, he was about to die. Obviously Rodin had his own pavilion, but they were good friends by then. But all these people came to see her there and were inspired. Pablo Picasso's painting Demoiselle d'Avignon, which is considered like pre-Cubism, one of the first almost Cubist paintings. If you look in the back, you can see these veils, and people think that those were inspired by Loie's dances at the fair. And later, Loie would hook up with Isadora Duncan again and make her famous. But that's where Isadora first heard of Loie Fuller. And how am I doing on time? I'm bad at keeping track.
7:30.
Okay, so 15 more minutes. Okay, I will go through this quickly. Okay, so this is just a poster from the Paris Exposition. This is Loie's Lily dance, where she, like I said, she kept getting longer and longer rods, more and more fabric, throwing it higher and higher. So she essentially made this human vortex where she'd spin around, you couldn't see her, and the fabric was thrown way up into the air. She'd order really nice silk. So she would talk about being able to like pull yards of it through a ring, it was so fine and lightweight. And at the same time she was dancing, Marie and Pierre Curie were at the World Exposition at a physics conference talking about their discovery of radium and polonium. And Henri Becquerel had discovered radioactivity a few years before just by accidentally laying a uranium rock on a piece of film, and it exposed it. And they said, what is this strange energy? But he X-rays were really sexy at the time, and he kind of let that go and focused on X-rays, but Marie picked it up. She was doing her research for school, and she said, I want to learn more about radioactivity. Her husband, Pierre, and Marie was from Poland. She had grown up in Warsaw, and I write about this in the book, which was under Russian occupation. She came to Paris to go to the Sorbonne. But she started testing all these different rocks to see if they projected the same energy, ended up discovering 2 radioactive elements, radium and polonium, and they were talking about this at the conference. And they got written up in the paper, and Loie read about it, and she read that radium glows. And she decided that she wanted some of this radium to light her dancing costume. I'm going to go through this faster because I think oh, there's a clock right there. Okay, great. Okay, I'll slow down. There's just so much about these 2 women. So here's an old poster of Loie. She was considered the fairy of light. Everyone loved her, but she knew she always needed to be doing something new to stay one step ahead of everyone else. So she wrote a letter to Marie saying, hey, I read about you in the paper. Could I get some radium? I have this idea for a butterfly costume. I want to light my wings. And Marie wrote back saying, no, it's too dangerous. And I'm killing myself trying to get, just a tiny bit of it purified. But Loie did come then to dance at their house. And Loie Fuller, when she decided she wanted to do something, there was no stopping her. So and Marie, the Curies were very private, but I'm guessing that Loie just insisted on coming to dance for them. So she danced, and this is what Eve Curie wrote about in her biography of her mother, but she came to their house, she set up her lights in their dining room, and she danced for them. She ended up being friends with them, and they came to her house, she came to their house. They actually at least once had her come to their house and dance when they had, they would have wealthy benefactors sometimes that they were trying to raise money for their science. They had, I'm trying to remember their names. People, I don't know, people like the Rothschilds. But Loie would come dance at their house when they invited these people over, when they were asking them for money, basically. But she became friends with Marie and Pierre. And I was just going to show you really quickly, if we can grab the light. So at the time in Eastern Europe, they were mining lots of uranium. And part of the reason they did it was because it could tint glass. See how this is a pretty green? It would tint glass interesting colors. But speaking, these glasses glow in the dark. Can you see that? Not because they're radioactive. It's actually but this glass is radioactive. And I can show you this later, but I have a Geiger counter here. And if I turn it on, if you buy uranium glass, it is radioactive. You will see, well, here, I can turn it on since I have time. Hang on. Let's see if I can get it on. My battery might be low. And this detects the radioactive waves and particles coming off of different things. It picks them up on a screen. Okay, is it clicking? Okay, I might have to do this later. It's not clicking. Okay, I'll do this later if you want to see it afterwards. Now it'll probably start clicking. Okay, so she formed this friendship with the Curies, and I'm going to kind of talk about their experience together. Oh, Loie wrote a lecture on radium, which she did give in London, I think, at one point. She was not very well educated. She did not like school. She didn't do that well, but she was a very curious person. And Marie would sit and talk to her about, and Pierre sit and talk to her about radium. So she learned a lot. And she actually, she didn't always get everything right when she was talking about radioactivity, but she knew a lot. And she talks in one of her notebooks about holding a tube of purified radium up to her closed eye and still being able to see a light. And first of all, yeah, that's really dangerous, right? Radioactivity is dangerous. They just didn't really understand it at the time. They just thought it could burn your skin, but it wasn't a big deal. But the fact that she wrote about that is more or less proof that she was in their lab looking at stuff, because no one except the Curies had radium at that time. As time went on, more and more people, they started to produce it and send it to other scientists, but really only the scientists had it for a long time until the US started mass producing it in a place in Paris. And that's when they started putting it in water and toothpaste and makeup,
What was the impetus for the Curies even being interested in it? What was the purpose?
In radioactivity?
Yeah. Where did they come from?
Oh, because Becquerel had discovered that physicists didn't understand anything about the atom. I mean, they didn't even know whether atoms made up the universe or whether ether made up the universe. They were trying to learn more about it. And this guy named Henri Becquerel they were just studying different things to see they had discovered X-rays, and they were looking for other things that emitted strange energy. So he had put a piece of uranium on a piece of film and stuck it in a drawer where there was no light. And generally you needed light or some added energy to see exposed film, right? But this exposed the film with no light present, and they said this rock must be emitting some kind of weird energy. The Curies, Marie was fascinated by this. They read scientific journals all the time, and they were looking for, well, Pierre mostly worked on magnetism, but Marie was looking for something to write her dissertation on. So she thought, I'm going to start testing different substances to see whether they have the same weird energy. But to do that, she actually used some equipment that Pierre had developed called piezoelectricity, or he's discovered piezoelectricity. You can stretch or compress crystals, and it either produces, if you compress them, it produces electricity. If you stretch them, it changes the charge. And they had a machine called a piezoelectrometer where you could put something into the machine. It's a complicated machine that you can actually see at the Curie Museum in Paris. It's really cool, but it could detect whether a rock, like from a certain, like polonium or not polonium, like uranium, if you put it in this machine, it would change the electrical charge in the air, and this piezoelectric meter would be able to detect that. So they could test whether things were producing this strange kind of energy. So Marie started testing all these different minerals, rocks and minerals, and discovered that this mining ore from a uranium mine was producing way more energy than uranium itself could produce. It was way more radioactive. And she figured out, oh, there must be something else in this rock that's producing these strange particles or waves. They didn't know what it was at the time. but she was specifically looking for things that produce, and she coined the word radioactivity, Marie Curie did. So and she was the first person to accurately be able to measure radioactivity. But that's a good question, yeah. So she was looking for it and she found it and discovered 2 radioactive elements. And she mostly did the chemistry, and she had to purify them and characterize them before they could be put on the periodic table of elements. And I write about this in the book, but she processed probably 3 or 4 tons of mining waste to get a piece of radium smaller than a grain of rice, so that the other scientists would believe her. And this was, taking mining waste, hauling it, dumping it in big pots, stirring it in sulfuric acid. I mean, the health risks that they took were just incredible, but it was all about the glory of science back then. They didn't even know that radioactivity was dangerous. But yeah, Pierre and Marie, and one thing that people should know about them is that they weren't in it for the money. They wanted to make the world a better place. They wanted to help humanity. And even when Marie created this process for purifying radium, which people made millions and millions of dollars off this process later, she didn't patent it because she wanted to share the technology with everyone, because it did eventually lead to a therapy for cancer, right? Radiation therapy came from Marie's discovery of radium, essentially. It used to be called Curie therapy back in their day. Yeah, so this is all in the book. It's just too much to cover right tonight. But one connection, Loie took Marie and Pierre to visit Rodin's gallery in Meudon. And this is a picture I took in 2018 when we were there. There's a Rodin museum in Paris, which is sort of the official Rodin museum because France owns the building. But this is his studio up in the hills that they took this glassed-in studio from the Paris Exposition, moved it up to his house in the hills just outside of Paris. And it is just gorgeous. I think they've rebuilt it, but it's the same as it was when Loie was there. So she took Marie and Pierre there to meet Auguste Rodin. I write about this in the book, but Marie loved him. And he was kind of this pompous ass, and he was terrible to women. His Camille Claudel, his apprentice and lover, went crazy, and he ruined her career, and she was a brilliant sculptor, but Loie just loved him and kind of went in and out of his favor because she would take his work to America and sometimes she'd just leave it there. And, she was very enthusiastic, but she didn't always follow through. She had good intentions, but didn't always do the right thing.
Do you know real quickly about how they funded him to actually make the bronze pieces? Because he made all the forms, but then he didn't have enough money to actually cast them. And there was a man in Philadelphia, this is in the late 1800s, 1900s, who came to him and said, I will fund this if you will make 3 copies, one for me and one for your museum and a second one for yourself. And he said, I will build a museum. So he did that. And in Philadelphia is the Rodin Museum. And I've been to the one in Paris too. There are more pieces of Rodin sculptures in the one in Philadelphia than there is in Paris. But they wouldn't have had any if it hadn't been for this man who was basically made his money as a plumbing contractor.
Oh, really?
The man had no money.
And I think Loie was involved in that. And I think there was some weird stuff that went on. Because I do think there was some stuff in Philadelphia that they weren't getting paid for in France. But yes.
Yeah. It's quite a story.
And
it's a really beautiful building with only Rodin. And
I would love to see that.
Right near the Philadelphia Museum, the one with the big steps.
Yeah. Oh, I would
Right
love to
across
see
the
it.
street.
That's cool. And then
FYI.
yeah, no, I know. In fact, one of the pictures, I'm not sure if it's in here, but yeah, there's a picture of Loie like kissing a statue in a museum. And I wonder if it's that. Yeah, and in the book, I also write about the De Young Museum in San Francisco has a lot of Rodin sculptures, more than most people. And Loie was responsible for bringing those too. Okay. Oh, Loie finally got her butterfly. She didn't get, I don't think it's lit with radium. Radium was becoming more available at the time, but it still wasn't readily available. But she worked extensively after going to Thomas Edison's lab and learning about glowing chemicals. She worked extensively with them in her own lab. She blew up her lab because a lot of these chemicals were really flammable. And often you had to expose them to light before they would glow. So she almost died blowing up her own lab. But eventually she had a butterfly costume that glowed in the dark. And she did a big performance for Marie and Pierre and some other scientists at the Sorbonne. And it was written up, this was written up in the Los Angeles Times and then spread to some other papers. But it's cool. You can read a whole description of them going to visit her in her lab and then her performance for them in her studio. So she finally got to do her butterfly dance for Marie, which I think was really cool. They also, it said in the article, had a seance afterwards. Pierre was really interested in magnetism and energy, and he really believed, he was actually inviting famous what do you call them, mediums to the Sorbonne, and using his electroscope to see when their spirits came, whether the needles went. I mean, they were there. Also Flammarion, they were doing research into whether or not there was a science to seances. Anyway, all that's so interesting, I think. Okay, Pierre was killed in 1906, a few days after the big earthquake in San Francisco. He was hit by a wagon. He had been getting sicker and sicker. He probably had bone cancer based on what we know now about radium is very similar to calcium. Have any of you read Radium Girls or seen them? Yeah, so calcium is very similar to radium, and radium gets incorporated into your bones. Beta particles bounce all around, but they can't make it out of your skin, so they do a lot of damage to DNA and cause cancer. So Pierre was getting sicker and sicker. He stumbled on a rainy day in front of a wagon and was killed, ran over his head. They don't know whether he stumbled because he was so weak from his illness, or whether he was very daydreamy and absent-minded too. So he may have just been thinking about a science problem. But Marie was heartbroken, horribly depressed for several years, so almost sort of emotionally abandoned her daughters, which was really hard. But in 1911, she was invited to the Solvay conference in Brussels, which was all the most brilliant physics minds in the world. If you look in my book, I name all these people, but my dad's a physicist, and he was looking at that just saying, well, that's amazing. So you can see Albert Einstein. On the end on the right is a man named Paul Langevin, who ended up having an affair with Marie. He was married to, from everything I read, a really horrible woman who physically assaulted him. He had been one of Pierre's students before Pierre died, and it was a very close family friend. They had an affair, but a few days after Marie learned, when she was at this conference, she learned she was going to be awarded a second Nobel Prize. She and Pierre had won the Nobel Prize for physics. They almost didn't give it to her because she was a woman. Then they were going to give her one for chemistry, for her method for extracting radium. And then one of the organizers of the Nobel Prize, after learning about this scandal, said, we don't want you to come. I think you should just not come unless you can prove you didn't have an affair. But she said, screw that. And she went anyway, and she went with her daughter and her sister, and she accepted her second Nobel Prize, which I think is phenomenal. She knew what she had done. She knew it was important, and she wanted credit for her work, and she worked very hard to get it, which she and Loie had that in common too.
She's the only woman in that room.
Oh yeah, definitely, absolutely. In fact, that was the main reason the affair was such a big scandal. Men in Paris had affairs all the time, they all had mistresses, but people were very critical of her for not being a stay-at-home mom. So the fact that then people were already critical of having a woman at work. They said it's unnatural, it's bad things are going to happen. And this gave them the excuse to say, see, I write a chapter in there though about Marie and her girls went hiking with Albert Einstein and his son in the Alps. So I wrote a chapter about that because I just think it's so wonderful that they were friends. And he was very supportive of her through the whole scandal, as was Loie. There's a letter from Loie that she wrote saying, don't listen to them. I take you in my arms. I love you. So even though they weren't best friends that saw each other all the time, they really were supportive of each other throughout their lives. Oh, I shouldn't go forward. Hang on. I'm going back. Okay, Loie, by this time, at some point, Loie stopped dancing. She physically couldn't do it anymore. So she had a dance troupe, and it was kind of amazing. most of the girls were British and their families, for some reason, just let them go like travel around with Loie and dance. So they came and lived at her estate. They did all these natural dances. They traveled to Egypt. They traveled to San Francisco with her during the war. This is a picture of the Eiffel Tower in 1913, just before World War I started. It was actually a scientific, they were going to tear it down at one point. Gustav Eiffel saved it by saying, this is a really important scientific tool. We can do experiments about solar radiation. We can do experiments about gravity. So you can see these, they put antenna on there. You can see it says telegraphy sans fil. So they put antennas on there and they would be able to send signals to ships. So it became basically a big scientific tool for a long time, which most people don't know about the Eiffel Tower. Everyone thinks, oh, everyone loved it, but the French hated it. They wanted to tear it down. It was saved by science. And Loie danced up there right before World War I. That was probably one of her last performances, but she was in the French Astronomical Society with Flammarion, and she danced atop the Eiffel Tower at the summer solstice in 1914. So I put a scene about that in the book because how could I not? It's just so beautifully visual. Like when the war started, they were both doing amazing things. Like we talked about, Loie was taking her dancers and French art to America and raising money for war efforts. Marie started an ambulance service, but she wasn't carrying doctors to the front line. She was carrying X-ray machines to the front line. Because back then, so many kids, soldiers were dying of infections because they would get shrapnel inside them and they had no way to detect where it was. And they would, by the time they brought them back to Paris where there were X-ray machines, the kids would be too far gone. Marie figured out how to hook up a generator in the back of these cars to the X-ray machine and drive the X-ray machines to the front line. So she created this whole ambulance service for France that would, and when she first started doing this, women weren't allowed on the front lines. But she finally convinced them. She actually learned how to drive and learned how to fix cars. Her daughter, Irene, joined her. And then that letter I put on the right is a letter that I found at the New York Public Library, but it's a letter that Loie wrote saying, I had lunch with Madame Curie. I'm going to try to help her raise money for her ambulance service. And Loie then wrote a big letter to like some women's club in England asking for them to donate money or cars or whatever. But just another connection between the two women. But Marie and Irene also started a whole school to train, they called them like, I'm trying to manipulatrices, a whole school to train women to run the X-ray machines on the front lines. And so they would go train the doctors then. So they did get exposed to tons of radiation because, once in a while they'd put on a lead apron, but these doctors were doing surgery with these basically, and the nurses were assisting them basically with open, unguarded X-ray bulbs. And Irene died pretty young, I think in her 30s, and probably a lot of that was because of the war, this X-ray exposure. Marie somehow lived to be 67, I think, which is just amazing, 65 or 67. Okay. 5 more minutes. Oh, here's the picture of Loie with the bronze. That might be in Philadelphia. I'd have to look at the photo credit. And then this is Loie's dancers in San Francisco. I'm just gonna, and I love this. So she also had the girls helping dye this fabric, but they went to the 1915 Panama Pacific exhibition in San Francisco and danced. And a lot of those some of those textiles got left in San Francisco and they're actually at the De Young Museum. I tried to see them, but you have to, years ahead, you have to like get them to pull them out. So I didn't actually get to see them, although they did test them for radioactivity. 1 or 2 of them, when I told them they might be radioactive, they were like, all of a sudden they emailed me back like, what? This is one of Loie's final and most important performances she did. And she wasn't actually dancing, but it was in 1925. She put on a performance it was in Paris. They had a big, it was when Art Nouveau was on the way out, arts and crafts movement was on the way in, and they had this huge sort of design festival. And they took if you've ever been in Paris, have you seen the Grand Palais? It's the building with the huge glass roof. They did it in there. And I didn't bring that with me, but I actually had to do a ton of research because I went there and I thought, this doesn't match how they described it. They actually built a whole stage and sets of stairs in there inside, it's the size of several football fields. But Loie Fuller covered this huge stage and all these steps with this silk The special silk she ordered and dyed that was just beautiful colors from all the descriptions, and performed to Debussy's composition Sur la Mer. They had an orchestra playing. She had dancers under the fabric, making it look like the ocean. So the waves would rise and then fall. And then she'd have dancers that were sirens, you know, going across the fabric, but I wish I could have seen it. I love that picture. And then another newspaper article I found described in 1925, so this is when they're older, Marie going to the theater to see one of Loie's performances. And I love that. I mean, yesterday was spotted sitting in a dressing room, so in Loie's room, you know, at the Theater of Champs-Élysées, a woman who was one of the biggest names in French science. Mrs. Curie had come to see the wonderful creations of Loie Fuller. It is likely that Miss Curie was attending for the first time a music hall spectacle. So I think that's so amazing that Marie, who was so private, never went to see one of Loie's performances. And Loie was also, as I finish up, just another connection. Loie was trying to set up a tour for Marie's daughter Eve to play piano in the United States. I write about in the book, Loie had a tumor in her breast that she ended up having surgically removed, but Marie by then had a radium institute where they were treating breast cancer with radiation therapy. And she actually went to see the doctor that worked for Marie. So there were so many connections. And I just love that these women were so brave and so strong and so persistent. You know, they never gave up, and they could both be extremely difficult, but writing this book, I fell in love with both of them. They're only human, you know, they're just amazing women that I think can inspire all of us, just, you know, to never give up on your dreams. So that's my presentation, I think. And maybe my last slide is a picture of my book cover. Yeah. But yeah, that's it. Do you have any more questions? Yes.
Are you gonna sign books?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
10 or 15 years ago, I was at the Dry House Museum in Chicago, and they were showing a video or something, you know, like a video of Loie Fuller dancing.
So
Where that is?
it may or may not have been Loie Fuller. So Thomas Edison wanted to film Loie Fuller, and she said no, because he didn't have color film. And Loie was, all she cared about was color. She was really obsessed with it. So they hired another dancer to do it. Edison colorized it. It became very famous. I mean, it was one of the most popular early films. I've seen all of them. Most of them are her imitators. There's one that was done by the Lumiere brothers that looks a little bit like her, I think, but from what I understand, she never allowed herself to be filmed. But it's fun to watch her imitators. And if you look online, there's a woman in New York City named Jody Sperling, who is a Loie Fuller dancer, and she has some gorgeous, it's fun to watch her dances, or you can watch, there's a French film about Loie Fuller that was very inaccurate, but beautiful. Yeah, they have her being born in the Wild West, basically. But the dancing, and it's beautiful. And to see these dances on a, you know, on a darkened stage, to see these dances, you can just see why people were so entranced with her art. They're just, it's incredible what she did. Yeah. So I would just look on YouTube. Yeah.
How long was your research for the book?
It was probably 2 years. I spent a good year just reading everything I could get my hands on about Loie Fuller and Marie Curie. And I write kids' science books too, so I was kind of doing it on the side. But then I went to New York a couple times to the library there, 2 or 3 times, and then went to Paris and had a real adventure seeing the places to write. It's really helpful when you're writing to be able to describe something, to have been in the room, because you can look online a million times at photos and you don't understand until you get in the space. And just details like, you know, the chestnut trees, and yeah, everything you see inspires you. So yes.
Images sculpted on the building, right?
Yeah, yes.
I couldn't ever figure out why at first when researching to figure out that her face is something facade of that building.
in Paris. Yeah. Yeah, she was so popular. Well, yeah, and it wasn't her building. She was sort of the poster child for Art Nouveau. So I think that's a lot of it. Someone was, you know, how people, one of the statues at the World Exposition looked like Sarah Bernhardt. I think you know how cultural icons sort of can get incorporated into architecture, but it might have just been one of her super fans. Honestly. But I didn't see that building, but I've seen photos of it. But yeah, she had a very distinctive face. Yeah, but she was also considered, you know, the fairy of light. So she was represented everywhere. Yes.
The posters that I've seen portray Loie Fuller in decidedly erotic.
Yeah.
Attire. Was it all a bait and switch for a family show?
No, I think that was just the artist being artists, you know. They wanted to draw this curvaceous, beautiful woman. But I think most of her performances were you didn't see her, you just saw fabric. So that's a good question though, bait and switch. So they think it's gonna be a sexy woman and they get there and like, she's not, yeah. I don't think so. I think she was so famous. I think everyone sort of knew what she did. And, but you're right. Most of the posters you see of her, she's this, you know, she looks like a model, and she definitely did not look like a model. She was very pretty and I would have loved to meet her. They say she just had these sparkling blue eyes and she'd grab your hand and like really warm, and I think a really wonderful person, but she wasn't a beauty queen. She wasn't statuesque. In fact, I watched the Radioactive movie on Netflix, and the Loie Fuller they have is like tall and willowy. And I just thought that's fine, you know, but no, she was not tall and willowy. Her art was, but that was part of the point, you know, her art was not having the female figure be central in the performance. It was about people seeing what their imaginations conjured, you know. But that's a good question. Yeah, absolutely. So maybe they drew some men in, like, right? And Loie was she wanted to make money. She was very interested in making money. The problem was she would spend it right away because on her art. I mean, once in a while she'd buy a fur or something. And people made fun of how she dressed in Paris. But she poured all of her money back into buying, you know, chemicals and fabric, but she was a very good businesswoman. She was good at making money. She just wasn't good at keeping money. Yeah. Yeah.
Like only a few pages. It was like Ruben went down to Florida and then bought a property for $4,000 with money he didn't have.
Yeah.
And then Loie had married a dude.
Yep.
Temporarily.
Yep.
Just to get his money, essentially. And then Loie's husband went to go see him, and then the next day Ruben was dead.
Yeah.
And then she tried to go see her father, but then her husband was like, "Yeah, no, he's already involved in this and buried."
Yep.
So do you think he killed her?
I do. I wrote about that in the book. I think he killed Ruben. Yes.
He's actually buried in the Fordsport Cemetery,
Is he?
which is right on the street here.
I want to go see that, his grave.
Also filmed that. Asked me if I would consume his body because I.
Oh, to see if he was poisoned?
To see if he was poisoned, and we were told.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they talk about that, how quickly he was buried. He was buried right away. I think he was killed, and I wrote about that in the book. It's also interesting. I found tons and tons of, like, Loie was very litigious. So I found lots of newspaper articles about her suing this dude she married because he was a polygamist. He had at least one other wife. He was not a good guy. But I think, you know, she married him for his money, and I'm pretty sure. So yeah, I write about that in the book, but I do think that her ex-husband killed her dad. It was very, very strange circumstances.
since she knew so many artists, it's surprising she never bought artwork from some of the famous artists that she shared friendships with.
They gave her artwork. They don't know what happened to it. Because I think Gabrielle Bloch inherited all of her stuff. But no, apparently there was like some guy who had a houseboat in Paris for a while that had a lot of her stuff, but they don't know what happened to a lot of it. A lot of it's just disappeared. But oh yeah, no, if you look at pictures of her old studios, there are like photographs and sculptures, and people did give her art, but it's just, who knows where it is now. Yeah. Yes.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
A dumb question.
Yeah.
and a less dumb.
Okay. There are no dumb questions.
Well,
Yes.
so the Folly Bergère, is that still in use or?
Yes.
Tourist?
No, it's still in use.
What did they do there?
I think they do all kinds of things. So but we saw a play there. We saw Le Petit Prince there, and it's actually on Broadway now. So I think they run some shows through there that are maybe on, it was in French when we saw it, but it's like it's recorded narration with the acrobats on stage. They have like, I do think they have like fashion shows there and maybe some burlesque shows once in a while, but yeah, it's still very much, and when I was there, it was a family matinee, so, but it's still
Kind of seems like it looks the same.
the facade has changed. I should have kept that picture in the slideshow. The facade has changed. It's Art Deco now. The doors at the bottom are still the same, but there's a big like brass Art Deco looking thing on the front now.
Then,
But the inside looks, the theater itself looks very much the same. Yeah, it looks almost exactly the same.
Okay, and then isn't there a quarterback in Washington in the NFL named Heinecke?
Oh, I don't know. I did know that, but I don't know if he's related. It's my, it's my husband's family. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but,
Okay. Yeah, but it was really fun to go to Paris, and we did go to a show at the Moulin Rouge because I wanted to see like a burlesque club, because that's still very much the same way as it was back then, and it was very cool. Yeah, I saw the can dancers, and it was really fun. But yeah, and if there's anyone here who's related to Loie Fuller, I would love to meet you. I would love to meet some. Are you? Fantastic. Oh, I see it now. Nice. Yeah. I just, as I said, when I was writing this book, and people always ask me, can you relate more to Marie or Loie? And I'm a scientist, but I'm more of a Loie. I'm disorganized and creative, and yeah. Yes.
Were the Curies and Loie Fuller dinosaurs?
Oh, no. Oh, were they Dreyfusards? They were not anti-Semitic. Is that what you're asking?
Well, how do they stand on that famous case?
Oh, I'm sure they stood on.
Everyone took a side on.
Yeah, I'm sure they.
So we know.
Well, actually, Loie, I don't know. The Curies were very liberal. I'm sure the Curies were on the side of Dreyfus, but I don't know about Loie. She, I think sometimes she would say whatever she thought people wanted her to say, or I don't know. She was not, I don't know how she stood. She didn't seem very political, honestly. Yeah. But the Curies were political for sure. And I'm sure they were on the side of Dreyfus. So what year was that? Do you know?
1895.
Yeah. And there was an army, was he a colonel, or there was a man in the French army who was Jewish, and he got blackmailed. I forget what happened, but it
Falsely accused of treason.
Yes.
Divided
The country. Yep.
Dreyfusards and anti-Dreyfusards.
Yes. So it was a big anti-Semitism controversy in Paris. But that's a good question. Loie, I don't think was political, but the Curies were, absolutely. And especially Marie, after growing up in Poland under Russian rule, was just horrible. She had been totally, her family was destroyed. Yes.
I've heard it said before that some of the American dancers basically took her dances, brought them to America. something?
Took Loie's dances?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, there's some famous American dancers.
Oh,
who
yes.
Basically copied her work, studying with her in Paris, and then came back here.
Oh, probably.
And got famous,
Yeah,
but-
probably. But she also launched Isadora Duncan, who's probably the most famous American modern dancer. She took her on tour to Europe and made her famous. And then Isadora just left, checked out. But yeah, it's an interesting story. I wrote about that too. But Isadora was apparently, like, Loie wasn't a very good dancer. Isadora was just incredible. And I'm sure you can see videos of her dancing maybe. Yeah, Loie launched several people to fame. She loved art, and I was impressed with how she, like I said, she almost always hired women reporters and to tell her story, and had this troop of girls. Although I don't know who would send their kids off with Loie Fuller to America. Yes.
I have a question about the material that she used. How did she deal with it? How did she travel with it? Where did it come from? And I mean, how do you deal with this material day after day?
Yeah, so one newspaper report, I don't know where she got it, for the Sur la Mer that I was showing you. This I think she got from somewhere in Europe. She ordered it specially dyed for this performance. But in one newspaper art interview, the woman describes these 6-foot-long boxes that Loie had, stacks of them, and she had each dress in a different box. So I think that's kind of, and then they had big trunks that they traveled with. So I'm sure it was hard to transport.
When did they put tissue paper between this there?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question though. Those are some expensive textiles. For a while, I think the Rothschilds owned a lot of her textiles. She had an exhibition at the Louvre, but I don't know what's happened to those now. I would be curious to see if someone could track them down. Maybe they're still in someone's collection. All right. I think we're going to do a drawing for the books now. And if you want to.
Time for last minute. Come up now. We'll get your ticket in. Yes, I'm